Welcome back to our mini-series on meditation and self-development. Over the last few weeks, amongst other things, we've already been looking at some of the skillful ways in which we can make decisions in a way that we can avoid the regrets that might otherwise upset our ability to meditate well. Well, this week we're going to be looking at two more strategies for making decisions, this time particularly applied to the situations of the complex social and the spiritual sort of decisions which we might confront in life. And this is because it's not just our meditation which affects our quality of mind, but also our dealings with our social context, and sometimes also the interaction between our everyday life and our meditation itself. So this gives rise to two more strategies which we can add to our toolbox for making decisions in life. Most people think that just to fit in with the social context is the best thing to do, just to go with the flow. They consider is the way in which to adapt themselves culturally, which is the best. But in fact, this may not be the case when it comes to our personal self-development or our meditation. Often we hear the proverb, "When in Rome, do as do the Romans." But what if all the Romans pluck out their right eye? Would you do the same thing? Would you leave yourself blind just to fit in with what the Romans do? I'm sure you'd agree that you also need to have a standpoint. It's good to fit in when you can, but you must also have your standpoint, because you alone and no one else is responsible for your own quality of mind and your ability to make progress in meditation. So exactly what principles can you use in order to find out where your standpoint lies when it comes to fitting in on a social level? Well, there are four considerations to think about. The first of these is our baseline of morality. Over the last few weeks, we've already been talking about taking advantage of ourselves and others, especially the weaknesses. We've heard about the fact that we should avoid killing, stealing, committing adultery, telling lies, and indulging in various sorts of intoxicants. And in fact, this is the baseline of our morality. You hear some people say, well, I only drink to be sociable. But in fact, by being sociable in such a way, you are compromising your own baseline of morality. Therefore, if fitting in with the social context means that you're going to compromise your baseline of morality, then what you're doing is you're also compromising your ability to make progress in your meditation. So this is the first thing you have to consider in the social context. However, it's not only our baseline of morality which counts for everything. Sometimes in society we ought to be more generous than the situation demands of us. To give an example to make this clearer to us, we need to also cultivate virtues in our lives. Supposing you are standing at the side of a canal and you see someone drowning. If you happen to be a swimmer yourself, then if you just stand by and let the person drown, although you didn't compromise any of your baseline of morality, but people would say that you are rather a thoughtless person or a selfish person, not to lend a helping hand. So this would illustrate that apart from just maintaining our own morality, sometimes we have to do a little bit more for our fellow man. And in this context, then we come across the 5 virtues which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, the things like compassion, which we need certainly in this case where the person is drowning in the water, things like right livelihood, sensual restraint, truthfulness, and mindfulness. These are the virtues which, again, we should not compromise if we are trying to fit in on the social level. A third thing which we should try to consider is the local customs. If the local customs don't compromise the virtues and the baseline of morality which we've already been talking about, then we should try to fit in as far as possible. Sometimes the customs we come across may not be quite the same as our own. For example, in some countries they give very high reverence to the king or queen of the country. If it doesn't hurt you, then you should try to fit in to these customs as far as possible. There's an example which some Westerners meet in Thailand, for example, where sometimes in a village it's not that every person in the house has their own cup to drink from. What they normally do is they all share the same cup in the same family. So if someone is invited into the house and receives hospitality, sometimes it's the same cup of water which is passed around for everyone to drink from. If you're thoughtless as a Westerner and you are insistent on your Western standards of hygiene, then you might upset the people who are giving you hospitality. But if you're more thoughtful and you try to fit in with the local customs because they're not compromising your level of morality or your virtues after all, is that you should share the water which has been so kindly offered to you And in that way you can fit in with the culture and you can get along better with the people in this new country where you're visiting. The fourth and the last consideration in the social context is the law. Now, I shouldn't have to tell you that the law is something which you have to follow anyway, but sometimes from country to country the laws do differ as well. And if you happen to be in a particular country, then you do have to abide by whatever laws are in force in that country. So if they don't compromise with your morality, your virtues and the customs, then you ought to try to fit in as close as possible. An example of a situation where you may be in doubt according to what to do in a situation is perhaps if you're a hospitable person who normally likes to put people up in your own home, but if a criminal running away from the law or a spy comes along and you put them up in your house, then of course you will have regrets later because you may have criminal follow-up to your activities. So sometimes you have to forego your normal virtues in the case that it does come in conflict with the law. So these are 4 considerations which we bring into play when we are trying to fit in, when we're trying to be sociable in a particular social situation. If we can manage to do it well, then we'll find that our meditation also will go more smoothly. What about in a more spiritual context? Sometimes we wonder how, in a spiritual context, our meditation fits in with our daily life. Sometimes we may think that they are 2 separate things altogether. But in fact, there are a system which we can use in order to determine whether there is real integration and commitment between our meditation and our daily life. And this system is something which we call the Noble Eightfold Path. It's rather like when we're meditating that we are drilling deep into the ground for a diamond. Except in our case, you cannot drill into your mind with a drill bit, but you need to use something much more subtle to get deep inside to the brightness and the wisdom inside yourself. You cannot use an anchor or a chisel to get out this wisdom from inside yourself, but you have to use something very subtle, which is the focused mind, a mind which is not scattered onto meaningless or unimportant factors. So the question is, how can we hone our mind down to make it precise enough to dig deep inside us to reach the wisdom and the light inside ourselves? Well, there are a total of 8 factors which can allow us to do this. And the first and the most important factor which we need to start with to give us the pilot drill bit to start to go deeper into our mind is a right view about the world, or a right understanding. Right understanding is not an understanding of things in general like geography or physics or what time the bus comes to a certain bus stop, but in fact it is a right understanding about certain aspects of life and the world, things like the things which will inspire us to actually want to develop ourselves or to make improvements to our mind. Things like feeling that our own actions count, for example, or thinking that generosity and public welfare are things which are useful and beneficial to the world. These sort of things are a baseline which start us off in our quest for self-development. It's rather like a high-quality hammer or drill which we can start to use for digging deeper into the mind. On the basis of such assumptions about the world, we can move on to the next factor, which is right intentions about the world. On the basis of right assumptions, then we can start to think correctly, we can start to understand more correctly about issues of life and the world. Such intentions are generally intentions to do good for ourselves and for the world, not to just let ourselves stay as we were born, but in fact to improve and upgrade on ourselves during the period of our life. Once we start thinking in the right way, once we start to have the inspiration to do the right things in life, then we start to talk to ourselves, give ourselves a self-talk, and start to talk to others too, to convince ourselves to get down to the action which is involved in self-development. It's rather like justifying things to yourself, or it's rather like communicating or cheering yourself up, giving yourself the encouragement to put in the effort which is required for self-development. Some people do this just silently in their own mind. Other people do it in a more legible way, which you may have done earlier in the series by keeping a diary of all the good intentions, or it may be the meditation which they've been doing. This, in fact, is a way of training yourself in this third factor, which is right speech. Once we start to convince ourselves to do the right thing, then the next step of the process is that we actually get down to doing the actions which are required to help us onwards in our process of self-development. What is important when we are choosing which actions we should be doing is that we have to play according to the rules. If we have to be playing a board game, then we have to play according to the rules. If you go swimming in the sea, then you can swim, nothing wrong with that, but you shouldn't go fishing or harming the environment in which you are swimming in the sea. You have to play according to the rules. You have to make sure that by your actions you're not taking advantages of your weaknesses of yourself or of others. Supposing you want to learn karate, that's okay. But if you use your karate to take out your anger on others, then that's no longer a good thing anymore. If you do so, it's rather like if you are drilling into a rock and you let the drill slip away from the hole which you've been drilling. This can be very dangerous for yourself, and it also will destroy your quest to dig deeper for the diamond inside. Actions are things which we do on a one-off basis. We do them now and then. But one of the actions which we tend to do the most habitually and which tend to have the biggest influence on the way we look at the world, the way we understand the world, are the actions which we do every day. And this is why right action on a one-off basis leads on to the sort of actions which we do on an everyday basis, especially the sort of actions we do to earn our livelihood. And this is the fifth factor which we call right livelihood. There are certain sorts of livelihood which tend to give us a very distorted and very negative view of other people around us in the world. Things like selling weapons to others, where we are glad when we see other people in conflict. If we are involved in things like the human slave trade or prostitution, where we tend to see our fellow human beings as nothing more than a profit. Where we are selling animals to the slaughterhouse, where we know that those animals will be going there with no chance of return. If we are selling alcohol and we are happy when we see someone who's drunk instead of feeling sorry that our society has come to such degradation. Or if we're selling poison or insecticides, pesticides which we know are going to contribute to the deaths of innocent animals. These sort of profits which we're making in life are not profits which are made in a wholesome way, because there are always profits which are made at the expense of either other animals or other people's happiness. So if we are choosing how we earn our livelihood, we ought to give consideration to the sort of livelihood which will help to keep us on target, even in our own meditation practice. If we have too many distractions in the way we earn our living, or if we have too many regrets which come later as a result of the sort of work we're doing, then later in life, then we'll start to have the worries which will upset our ability to meditate well. At this sort of point in your practice, when you start to make wholesomeness even part of the way you earn your living, you'll start to see the results of all your good efforts. Because you have no distractions, instead of your mind being scattered away onto other meaningless issues, you'll find that your mind will spend most of its time near to the center of the body the whole of the time. When that's the case, then you start to see results for your work. You feel more inspired to put in more effort into your practice. What sort of effort do we mean? Well, basically there are 4 different sorts of effort which we will be inspired to do. That is the effort to get rid of bad habits which we might already have, the effort not to pick up any new bad habits, the effort to increase the good habits which we already have, and the effort also to go on to do good habits which we didn't formerly have. If we can go into these 4 types of effort, then it will move us on to the point where the mind really does start to become firmly fixed at the center of the body, because you have no further problems anymore. Now, when you go into a jewelry shop, instead of being tempted by a diamond and thinking that you want to pop it in your pocket and go home with it, you will overcome the temptation in your mind by bringing your mind back to your center instead, which is a much cheaper alternative. So once your mind starts to be more in the center, we build up a 7th quality, which is called mindfulness. In fact, mindfulness means the state of mind where your mind is not wandering away from the center of your body anymore. It's something which we try to build up in our meditation. But what you can see from the 6 factors which have already passed by is that mindfulness has already been built up just from the way which we'll be living our life. In the beginning, mindfulness means that our mind will just remain in the center of the body without doing anything very special. If you translate this into the experience which you might have in your meditation, you'll start to be able to see some mental object or feel some mental object at the center of your body. But later, once your mind settles further, once your mind has been in place for a longer and longer time, you start to feel there's some mental attraction at the center of your body, rather like a magnetic force which seems to draw your mind deeper inside. This is the development of the final path factor, the 8th path factor, which we call right concentration, which is actually leading your mind deeper into a deeper level of understanding. What you find is that this process of 8 factors is not a linear process, but in fact it's circular. Once your mind builds up a deeper level of understanding from the new inner experience which you have built up for yourself, what you will find is that the new understanding which you bring back to your life will help you to have a more accurate feeling of right intention, more accurate ability to have right speech, more accurate ability to have right action, livelihood, and effort in the way which you already described. It's like a circuit which is like a spiral which leads us deeper and deeper towards a still mind and towards purification in our mind, to help us become more perfect in every aspect of our self-development. So if we are missing out one or more of the path factors, we'll find that this circuit is not completed, that we cannot make progress in our spiritual practice, in our self-development. So you ought to examine yourself to see if you are missing out on one or more of these path factors. If you find that your meditation isn't progressing in spite of the fact that you have put in a lot of effort in your meditation, then perhaps you're missing out on one of the other 7 factors which we've talked about here. Maybe during the week that follows you can use this Eightfold Path to examine your own efforts, to see if there are any shortcomings in your own practice. If there are shortcomings, then try to fill in those gaps as well as you can. In the meantime, try to keep up your meditation, and next week we'll be going on to look at the ways in which we can turn our day-by-day, job-by-job efforts in self-development into something more of a career. So in the meantime, keep up your daily practice, and I'll see you again at the same time next week.